All right. So, good evening, everyone. I'm so glad that we're going to spend the next 50 minutes together um, talking and exploring together. I'm Rabbi Ron Symons from the Center for Loving Kindness of the JCC. And although not advertised, tonight I'm joined by my colleague, Katie Plofker. Katie, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Plofker. I am an assistant director at the JCC's Early Childhood Development Center. And for the past 6 months, I've been getting into this work, or more than 6 months, getting into this work with Rabbi Ron Symons, and have really gotten to learn a lot along the way.
Yeah, so what we thought that we would do together is to explore these big questions about anti-racism, multiculturalism, and Jewish values, and along the way, show you some practical ways that we're dealing with that with the littlest ones in our community. And we're always of the opinion that if you're doing something good with the little ones, maybe it can spread up to the bigger ones as well. So we think that there's something there for us to have a conversation about. So I'm going to share my screen, and our hope is that what we're going to engage in tonight is going to be a conversation and not a lecture. So why don't we even begin that way by simply asking the question, what is it about these three things that drew you to be here today? And there are lots of ways that we can go about this. You can use that raise your hand feature in the reactions. You can type something into the chat, or you can just speak up now. So, in fact, I'm going to stop the share so that at least I can see everybody. And anyone want to talk about what drew you into this today and tonight?
Well, for me, it was the anti-racism part. My name is Paul Barkowitz. I'm a member of Bethel Congregation in the South Hills. My daughter, Alana, and I co-chair an anti-racism committee within the synagogue and have a number of different initiatives, everything from joint ventures with an African-American group to book discussions, things like that. And so it's a very relevant point. And I'm sure at some point we'll get into why we view this to be such a tie-in to our basic Jewish values. But
Sure.
for me, again, and where I am, our synagogue, really, we have strong support from our rabbis and from administration, the board and president and so on. It's really a move that we feel is long overdue, especially after George Floyd. It's
Great.
something I think we're not unique here, right? I think a lot of synagogues
Yeah.
are here. So it's for me, this is a very timely presentation.
Great. Thank you, Paul. I appreciate you sharing so much about what you're doing in the South Hills at Bethel. Anyone else want to share, what is it about these three that drew you into it, or where the tension is between the three, or the perceived tension?
Ron, what drew me to it is there's a very famous quote about first they came for, and to me it's that the way things have been going, first they have come for the African Americans, and where does it stop? And I'd like to see how we can go ahead and make some positive changes.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that, and bringing in that poem is a great way to engage in it all. Anyone else? Maybe one more comment if anyone's interested. Okay, so I'll go back to the screen, and as I'm getting the screen back up, let's also just take a moment and acknowledge that we're having this conversation at a really hard time, not just obviously in America around race issues, but a real hard time for us as a Jewish community, for Israel. Our conversation has nothing to do, right, with what's going on in Israel, but perhaps there might be some undertones, right, and we'll see how that plays in. So, like I said, throughout, we welcome comments. Feel free to speak up in any way that you want. So, we want to begin by identifying these terms, by defining them, so that we have the ability to be on the same page around the conversation. So I want to begin with a statement, the conclusion of our Black Lives Matter North Star, that after a summer of listening to JCC staff, we listened to 120 staff members, Ask them, what is it about current events and privilege that keeps you up at night? And as a result, we were able to bring together a full statement, actually based on some early childhood language that we were already using across the country, across JCCs, to help us understand what do we need to be doing around Black Lives Matter. And the final frame of the 7 frames, the 7 lenses that we looked at, is Tikkun Olam. I'm pretty confident that many of us understand that Tikkun Olam generically means repairing the world. For us, it has to do with taking responsibility. And so what we're committed to through the Center for Loving Kindness, through the JCC in all of its departments, and I would think through Jewish community, is that we're committed to repairing the brokenness that is not only out there that we have to fix, but also inside of us, that we are both a part of the solution, hopefully, of how we get to a less racist world. And because of how it is that many of us walk in this world and the privilege that we have as we walk in this world, we know that we ourselves are a part of the system. And we got to figure out, how do we do the internal and the external work at the same time? And all of this for us is guided in that very broad definition of tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, right? Justice, justice shall you pursue. And I know there are lots of ways to answer the question, why does the Torah say that it's justice, justice? Why not just justice you shall pursue? And for us at this moment, I think the duplication of the word justice is because there's justice out there and there's justice inside that we need to do. It's a two-way street in that way. So what is anti-racism, right? Let's put a term on the table. And so we've gotten this from Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. And he says that it's not enough to just be not racist. It's a claim that signifies neutrality. I'm not a racist, but neither am I aggressively against racism. But there is no neutrality in the racism struggle. The opposite of racist, according to Kendi, isn't not racist. It is anti-racist. And here are 3 aspects of the difference. One endorses either the idea of racial hierarchy as a racist or racial equality as an anti-racist. One either believes problems are rooted in groups of people as a racist or locates the roots of problems in power and policies as an anti-racist. And one either allows racial inequities to persevere as a racist or confronts racial inequities as an anti-racist. So I have to be honest with you, at times, I'm a bit uncomfortable with the term anti-racist. And maybe someone else wants to speak to that, because it sounds like you're against something as opposed to being for something. But the way that he has framed the conversation for us in America now, right, is that we have to be anti-racist. We have to be against the system that promotes racism. And if we're just not a racist, then we're not doing what we need to be doing in order to be an agent of tikkun, an agent of repair on this. Anyone want to step in at all on that?
Well, that could be stated in a positive way, which is being an anti-racist is pro-fighting racism.
Thank you.
And so, I think it can be cast in but the idea is being passive and saying, no, I'm not a racist, and stopping there.
Yeah.
It's not, it's not enough.
So Paul, I'm curious, in the South Hills, right, in the work that you and your daughter are doing at Bethel and beyond, does that negative, positive come up in conversation?
The first thing we did is to have our book club, and the book we had was this one. And it was a great place to start. We moved from there into The New Jim Crow was our next book. Yeah. But I think there's buy-in to that. There seems to be. There's certain things, I remember the discussion, there were certain things that stuck out that really, and I don't remember specifically, that people aren't comfortable with. I think one of the most important things when we have a book club or any sort of discussion about this is be honest. And being honest sometimes means means disclosing things. Like in my case, I can point to things I did when I was younger, things I said that are not positive, revelations I've had about myself over the years, and still are gaining insights into things that I'm not proud of about myself. I think.
And so, Paul, I appreciate you sharing that, and that takes us back to where we were in the previous slide. That when we realize what we've said and how we've walked in this world, that's the repair that we have to do so that we can do it differently. And you've mentioned you clicked off 2 or 3 different books. I think we're living at this amazing moment, because it's not that there is just a growing canon of anti-racist literature or pro-equality literature out there, but people like us have a greater awareness of what exists and what keeps on coming with it. So I'm glad that you guys were doing that.
Can I just stick in just one real quickly?
Yeah,
and one more book that just came out, and I've been anxiously awaiting, because these books, even the more recent ones, if they're pre-George Floyd, they're already dated.
Yeah, right.
And so I've been waiting for the post-George Floyd books to come out. I think the first one is out. It's The Sum of Us. Yeah. My brother's read it. It comes highly recommended. Yeah. I'm personally very interested in reading that. And I think, again, you talk about the books that have been there. I think we're on the precipice here of a number of additional books coming out post-George Floyd that can capture some of what's been going on since then.
That's great. So I'll just say I've read it, and I actually sat on a panel with the author through the Pittsburgh Foundation, and it's an amazing book. And she has an amazing story to tell, an economic story, not just a moral story. And it's well worth it.
Thank you. Good to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So let's now move into this other term, multiculturalism. Katie, you want to guide us through?
Well, speaking of wonderful books, Zaretta Hammond is author of Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain. And as we were getting into all of this work, anti-racism was a term that I'd heard before, multiculturalism, diversity, but culturally responsive teaching was a new one for me as an educator. And so she really gets into this whole idea of multiculturalism. And it really is, it's this common term that's used interchangeably with words like diversity. But in education, she really takes it and she makes the distinctions between actually 3 different pieces, which are multiculturalism, social justice, and culturally responsive. In her book, it's all having to do with teaching and education. But she describes multicultural education as focusing on cultural diversity and celebrating it. And also that it centers around creating positive social interactions across differences. And really, this is where diversity and inclusion efforts live. It also concerns itself with exposing privileged students to multiple perspectives and other cultures. A metaphor that we use a lot in education is providing students with windows and mirrors. So they should not only see themselves reflected in their classroom environment, and the curriculum, but they should also be given windows into other cultures, specifically ones they don't identify with.
And so again, I just want to point out that every time Katie is going to guide us in this, it's going to be through a lens of early childhood education. But don't let that get in the way of yourself saying, well, but I don't have early childhood kids. My grandkids even aren't early childhood kids anymore. Don't let that get in the way. This is about how do you create ideas, and how do you help people to become good neighbors? And that's what we're striving for with it.
So this next slide is really about multiculturalism versus being culturally responsive, that new term that I have learned. And this is one of my favorite visuals, because a lot of the times when we're getting into this work, we really talk about diving deeper and going below the surface. So this visual really reflects both multiculturalism and being culturally responsive. The iceberg model shows multiculturalism as exploring and celebrating someone's surface culture, whereas being culturally responsive is really that diving deeper. This means understanding another culture's communication norms, not just their language. And another example is learning about a culture's attitude towards collectivism. That's a really big one. It's important. It's importance that's placed on groups versus individuals. And every culture views collectivism differently. And that's a big part of what makes a culture its own. Of course, when we're looking at surface culture as well as deep culture, we always have to be really cognizant and thinking about generalization and really trying to steer away from that. You know, not every person from a single culture is necessarily going to have the same views. So steering away from that generalization is really important.
So we've now defined what anti-racism is. We've defined what multiculturalism is. Now the question is, where do Jewish values play into this? Because after all, it is Erev Shavuot, and that's why we're here, right? Through Federation and through our Jewish community and in celebration of Shavuot. So I want to take us through a few midrashim and some contemporary language that I think is gonna help us to find the foundational basis of why it is we should be engaged in this work from a Jewish point of view. Even if we were to say, well, I don't even need the Jewish stuff because it's the right thing to do, but I want that anchor so that we know that we're a part of a chain of tradition that stretches back and has the potential to stretch into the future as well. So let's begin with just some of the basic texts that we know from the Bible, right? God created humanity in God's image. In the image of God, God created him, male and female, God created them. A lot of stuff with Adam, humanity, let's not get there, but simply the fact that God created the first human being in the image of God, and that Adonai, God, formed Adam, humanity, from the dust of the earth, and Adonai, God, blew into his nostrils the breath of life, and Adam, humanity, became a living being. This is basic understanding when you talk about Jewish theology, about being created in the image of God and having God be a part of our creative process. And so the rabbis were sitting around on Zoom about 2,000 years ago, asking the question, why is it that there's only one Adam? And they came up with three answers. They said, for the sake of peace among people, so that no one of us is going to say, my daddy was better than your daddy. You know, so there we are back into that early childhood mode, but that's human nature at large. And God knows we're seeing that play out right in our world, in America, in Israel. You know, how is it that we're all living on this earth having one ancestor? They also said that it was for the sake of the righteous and for the sake of the wicked. That is to say that just because you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth, it doesn't mean that you're always going to have a silver spoon, that your circumstances can change. And just because you might have not been born in one of those zip codes that allows for the greatest possibility of success, of financial success or educational success, doesn't mean that you're locked into that. And then finally, the rabbis 2,000 years ago said, it's for the sake of families. And quite honestly, I mean, the way that this one plays out is, you know, I just think it's so perfectly bar language that, you know, we only have one Adam now. We're all created in one humanity, right? And look at how messed up, that's not the word I would use in a bar, but look at how messed up the world is, that we keep on fighting with each other, right? That we have racism, that we have terrorism. Now, could you imagine, the rabbi said, if we had an Arab Adam and a Jewish Adam and a Muslim Adam and a white Adam and a black Adam and an Asian Adam and a Mexican Adam, and keep on going, can you imagine how much more messed up we would be? It's hard enough to try to do all this knowing that we're just from one humanity. Imagine what it would be like if we were from many different sources. So that's one foundation that I think is really important for all this. And then, of course, because we're talking about the Center for Love and Kindness, I can't help but to bring what I would say is the most important verse, right, in the entire Torah. And by the way, I'm not alone. Rabbi Akiva said it also, right? Love your neighbor as yourself is a great principle of the Torah. It's the best and it's the biggest. Other people, other religions have said that as well, but let's just stick with Rabbi Akiva. So he's sitting around with Ben Azai, and Ben Azai says, no, Akiva, you got it all wrong. It's not about love your neighbor as yourself. What it's about is the verse, this is the book of the descendants of Adam, him whom God made in his likeness. This is an even bigger principle than love your neighbor as yourself, because if we understand that every single one of us was created in God's image, then when you curse your neighbor, when you insult your neighbor, when you redline your neighbor, when you call your neighbor this, that, right? When you don't provide education for your neighbor, know who it is that you're not providing all that for. It's not just that person, but it's for someone that was created in God's image. And since you were created in God's image, it means that it was for us as well. That every time we do bad by other folks, simply because of who they are and what they look like and where they live and how we differ with them, we're doing bad by ourselves. And I can't help always to think about that Talmudic story of the two guys on a boat. And one of them takes out a drill, back then, whatever a drill was, and starts drilling underneath his seat. And the first one says to the second, what are you doing? He said, don't worry, I'm only drilling under my seat. And it's absurd. I like to think we're all on the same boat in the same ocean, but I know that the reality of racism in America is that we're on different boats, and some of the boats have holes in them. But the fact of the matter is that if one of those boats goes down, there'll be a whirlpool that'll pull all of us down. It all goes back to these concepts that God created one humanity, these concepts that we have to love our neighbors as ourselves, and these concepts that we, every single one of us, no matter our race, no matter our religion, no matter our ethnicity, no matter our gender, no matter our sexual identity or our gender identity, that we're all created in God's image. So let's take, let's go one more, right? One or two more. So now I want to just
Rabbi, wait. I just texted you a message.
Paul, I'm not able to look at the messages now.
Oh, okay. So I just had a question about that last.
Good, Paul.
How does the story of Esau and Jacob play into that narrative?
Listen, I think it doesn't make a difference. You know, in our worlds today, I mean, we all know this. We all come from families. And within our families, we still have people that don't get along with each other. I
understand that, but I'm just wondering in terms of early childhood education, when that story comes up, you know, what would be a good way to handle it?
Of Esau and Jacob.
Yeah.
So anytime we're dealing, well, let me start this way. Rabbi Lenny Kravitz, right, my professor at Hebrew Union College, would say to us, you never want to name your kids after someone in the Bible because they're all schmendricks, right? So I think that what we have in the Bible, and I don't want to go too deep into the early childhood side of it because we got a lot to cover, but what we have in the Bible is shared lived experience of how difficult it is to live life together in an intentional way with holiness in mind. And often the Bible gives us negative examples so that we can then understand that it's okay for us. I mean, here's the best way that I could describe it. If I were to sit around my table and start talking about my uncles, Esau and Jacob, and how they don't talk to each other, right? And how they want to kill each other, that would be considered Lashon Hara, evil talk. It would be inappropriate for me to do that. But if I'm talking about Esau and Jacob, who lived 5,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, in the days of the Bible, it's considered to be sacred talk. So we use those characters to help us to create a stronger moral sense of how it is that we want to live our lives today. Paul, I hope that helps. Happy to continue the conversation offline. So let's take a look locally and contemporaneously. What does that mean for us? So this comes from Grant Oliphant, the the president of the Heinz Endowments right here in Pittsburgh. And Grant has been a moral champion for several years now. And he published this article a few years ago where he started talking about what we means, not us, them, but an expansive we. And I was so pleased that he pulled in Joachim Prince's, Rabbi Joachim Prince from the Civil Rights era, right? His concept that neighbor is not a geographic term, it's a moral concept. I was pleased because it gives the concept broader exposure beyond just the Jewish community. And it was because of our conversations with him and helping him understand what the Center for Loving Kindness is that he came in exposure with that. And he goes on to say that collective responsibility, that's what this is about. The storyline of community challenges us to celebrate rather than shrink an ethic of giving to and paying for the society we want. It asks us to embrace our responsibilities to those who are vulnerable and new and different, not to the exclusion of anyone, but rather to the benefit of everyone. Most of us, most of all, it asks us to keep expanding our definition of we, to step away from the terrible, ironic silliness of terror-stricken self-interest and to bear witness to lives and challenges other than our own. That's what, when we're talking about anti-racism and multiculturalism and Jewish values, that's what we're looking for. And in case you thought that it's not enough, right, to have it from Midrash, and it's not enough to have it from a contemporary Pittsburgher. So let's go to Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, Alav Shalom, where he says that the test of faith is whether I can make space for difference. Can I recognize God's image in someone who is not in my image, whose language, whose faith, whose ideals are different from mine? That's the work that we have to do. That's the challenge that Sachs puts in front of us. And he finishes it by saying, listen, there are 6,000 languages out there in the world, and I want every one of them to still be there. I don't want to cancel any of those languages. And he says that what we need to do is that we need to focus on the deep human understanding that passes between people who, knowing how important their attachments are to them, understand how deeply someone else's different attachments matter to them also. We are here now, right, because of a connection that we have through a long heritage of standing at Sinai physically and metaphorically. Let's not deny that emotional experience to people who have that same kind of emotional connection on Christmas or on Easter or on Ramadan or on Diwali. We can keep on going with it. So I hope that what we've done so far is to define those terms, to show a Jewish foundation for it and an application for it as we go even deeper into what does it mean as we raise up the next generation.
So taking that that lens, B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God, and we bring that into early childhood by identifying and recognizing that children need and have the right to create positive self-identity. So this being created in the image of God, we really start with the children's sense of self. So we recognize that need, and then we understand that as humans, we all look different, right? And the children recognize that. They are not, and we've really kind of gone away from this term of being colorblind. Children are not colorblind. We are not colorblind. And when it comes to skin tone and hair texture, hair color, all of those things, children recognize that there are differences. And as adults, we really tend to still be leaning towards that color silent role, and don't talk about it. Everybody's the same. Let's move on. But by doing this, we really model that differences are not okay, and that this can really cause, and we've seen this, this can cause feelings of shame for children and can actually lead to a negative sense of self. So As the adults and in early childhood, as the educators, we must guide them in their understanding that being unique is a part of what makes us all humans, that bringing that exceptional piece of who they are to this world, that's something to be celebrated. So again, in early childhood, we let the children explore their own identity by presenting opportunities for positive self-expression. So the example that I'm going to go through tonight is a self-portrait experience and project. So in this experience, the children were given black, white, red, yellow, and blue paints, and they were asked to mix their own paint color that would then be later used for a self-portrait. And here's some of the children's dialogue. Child number 1 says, "I think we should add yellow. That's a person color." And so the educator gives them some more yellow paint and they say, "Story, story, 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 story." And then child number 2 says, "That looks like a construction site now." Child number 3 comes in and says, "Now it's kind of green. I don't know any green people." Later during the experience, child number 3 says, "That's a skin color. Adding yellow helped." Child number 2 says, "That's a child number 3 color." And then child number 1 says, "Child number 3 looks more red." Later on in the experience, child number 2 says, "It's the same color. Let's add some black and make it darker." Looking at the outside of their container, they say, "That's a lot of colors in here. Brown is all the colors together." So as you can see, there's a lot of examples of children kind of referring to colors as human colors or people colors, and really kind of exploring that idea of color theory a little bit here. So the educator was asked to, as this experience was happening in the classroom, to document. And we do that with photographs and recording their dialogues. But then the educator was also asked to reflect on the experience as their part in it. And so some of the educators' reflections and takeaways were really seeing that excitement of the children as they decided that they had finally mixed a human color, and really having that sense of pride that they were able to match their skin tone to the color that they had mixed. And but then the educator also wondered how the children of color would feel, or I guess how they felt, I should say, when the other children began to describe the darker mixed paint as being child 3's color. So the children didn't do that when they were mixing the lighter tints. And it really made that educator more aware of how naive many of the children were in regards to their own race and to their own skin color. Most don't know what to call their color either, but they will readily describe somebody else's color by saying, "That's a red color," or that's a green color, and I don't know green people. So it was really interesting to see how this played out in the classroom. But I think what was even more interesting for me was during one of our workshops, we tested this out with adults. And if you ever get the chance to sit down with some paints, it's really interesting. And in our group especially, and Ron can attest to this as he was also one of our...
I'm pulling up the picture now. Keep on going, Kitty.
Please. Ron was also one of our guinea pigs in this experience, because before educators bring something into the classroom, we often like them to try it out for themselves. And so a group of educators and some leadership as well tried this out with those paints and that palette. And Ron is showing his self-portrait, as you can see on the screen, which was really spot on. But I will tell you, it was very interesting to see sort of the struggle that some educators and leadership had with it. It really is challenging to identify yourself as a specific color, especially when you are using tempera paints. So
Katie, why don't we stop for a moment and just take a breath and think about what would it be like if adults, not just educators, but adults were to try to go through this experience. Anyone have any reflections on, okay, we did it for little kids and for people that take care of little kids and teach little kids, but what about everybody else? In other words, how are we doing so far in this conversation? Anyone want to step into it?
Ron.
Mark.
And
then Barbara.
I was sitting here. I was sitting here thinking that we're talking about kids recognizing differences. And I think that before they can develop a self-identity, they need to have an idea of what differences are and be guided to understand that differences are okay and that they are the norm and they're not to be feared.
Thank you, Mark. Barbara.
Yeah. If I understood you correctly, it sounds like the children were more able to label the color of someone other than themselves. Mm-hmm. So it makes me think that there's something in that about I'm the norm and the others are the ones who are different and have the different color. And I don't know, I'm not sure where I'm going with that, but it sounds like they were more likely to recognize and name the children who were other than they.
Right. So might I step in, and then Kitty, I'm sure you have something you want to add to it. It seems to me like the narrowness that Grant was speaking about, the narrowness that we've been playing with through the Midrashim and through the text from Torah are there by human nature, which is, I'm at the center of everything, mm-hmm. right? It's my land, it's my neighborhood, right? It's my money, it's my system. And that what we need to do as intentional community is we need to break that sense of us versus them and have a more we, where we're not just going to identify child 3's color as not normative, but to understand that there is no normative, that all of us, right, are abnormal in that way, that we're in this wonderful diversity coming from different kinds of soil, to play off of Genesis chapter 2, right? And having all different kinds of ingredients that are a part of who we are.
I would also add to that we all come from the same paint palette. And I think after using this experience in different classrooms with different children, the one common scenario is, I need to add a little bit more of this color, and oh, I need to add a little bit more of this color too. And, they're all creating their own image of themselves, but they're all using the same exact paints. And they're all able to achieve that same goal together. And that's really the important part there, is that they're doing this side by side. They're looking at each other, they're looking at themselves, and it's really, they're being set up with the same opportunity. And I think that's another really important piece to this.
So let's move the conversation away from the individual to the collective. And what you have on the screen now is one of my favorite sociological books, right? Community is the container within which our longing to be is fulfilled. Without the connectedness of a community, we will continue to choose not to be. It's not a Jewish quote, but man, is it a Jewish quote. And it's not a quote about anti-racism, but man, is it a quote about anti-racism. So Katie, why don't you help elevate us a little bit more even?
So the JCC's Early Childhood Development Center has a school-wide intention that is, our community aims to create an atmosphere that fosters reciprocal relationships in which every person, child, parent, and educator belongs and is essential, where everyone's values are heard, all are accepted, diversity is celebrated, and self-discovery is nurtured. I think I didn't put in my notes, but I did want to point out tonight that this was an intention that was developed by educators and developed at least 4, if not 5 years ago. So most companies and organizations have a mission statement. In ECDC, we have the school-wide intention. And again, this intention was created by educators, and it is visible as soon as you walk through the doors of ECDC. You can see it on the wall. Just like other mission statements, our intention was formed with the goal of illustrating our school's culture. And for us, that is a culture of belonging. So the next steps for ECDC after stating this intention, because that is all well and good, was really figuring out how to turn it into reality. This is not something that is really done when you finally have that plaque on the wall or when you can copy and paste that paragraph into a handbook. A culture of belonging is something that is worked towards every day by every individual. This is educators, children, parents, caretakers, leadership, etc. And our intention really became a journey and has been a journey or a masa. That has most recently presented itself in the form of an anti-racist workshop. And that's the one that I've been sort of referencing throughout the night. But the other thing that I think is really most important is that I've learned about anti-racism and this work is that it can only be done with accountability. And that's been a big part of it as well. So on this slide, you'll see that this chart is actually an adaptation, a simplification of Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory, which shows that there's not just one culture. We talk about having this culture of belonging in early childhood. We've been talking about multiculturalism all night, but that there are varying levels of cultures. So children, adults, every human that walks through our doors belongs to a macro, a meso, and a micro culture, as do we all. And that it is really our job to be culturally responsive to everyone and the various cultures that they identify with, to create a space where people feel like they can express themselves, a culture of belonging. And again, this is something that is always in progress and requires a lot of accountability. In this work, though, this was something that I also really had my eyes open to. Again, that term multiculturalism is thrown around a lot, but having this sort of deeper dive into it and really recognizing that not only is somebody a part of a nation, but they're also a part of an organization or a smaller community. And of course, everyone is a part of some type of relationship and our family, and it just kind of goes on and on. So not just thinking about somebody and labeling them, oh, you belong to this culture. No, you belong to many cultures.
So let's go back to Sachs, because, all of this sounds so good, but we're so progressive. We're so pluralistic. We're so diverse. But what's Jewish about it, right? Why is it that we can be here on Erev Shavuot, right? And saying that this is fully Jewish. So Sachs says the question is, to what extent will you see our present interconnectedness as a threat or a challenge, as the work of man, or as a call from God to a greater humanity, as well as to a greater self-restraint? As for me, I believe that we are being summoned by God to see in the human other a trace of the divine other. The test so lamentably failed by the great powers of the 20th century is to see the divine presence in the face of a stranger, to heed the cry of those who are disempowered in this age of unprecedented powers, who are hungry and poor and ignorant and uneducated, whose human potential is being denied the chance to be expressed. He says that is the faith of Abraham and Sarah, from whom this great faith, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, traces their spiritual and actual ancestry. That is the faith of one who, though he called himself but dust and ashes, asked of God himself, shall the judge of all the earth not do justice? He's talking about Abraham, of course. We are not gods, but we are summoned by God to do God's work of love and justice and compassion and peace. So with all of that, we want to leave you, before we just open up for conversation, with what our vision is for Pittsburgh. This is not early childhood. This is Center for Loving Kindness and the work that we're doing with police and with the Black community and with getting people to talk to each other across red and blue divides and you name it, right? That each and every one of us will be able to assess our local economic, our educational, our employment, our social, et cetera, and will be able to say, I belong to Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh belongs to me, and we belong to each other. And in doing so, we're not saying that I'm less a Jew because I embrace someone's Blackness or their Christianity or their Islam or their Hinduism. I'm not less of a white person because I embrace someone's Latinx culture. I'm more of who I'm supposed to be, right? Created in the image of God, because I actually see the image of God in you in a different way. So I want to, first of all, thank Katie, right, for, she's an early childhood educator. She normally doesn't stay up past 7 o'clock at night, right? So this
way
is
past my bedtime.
I know that. And it's just such a great partnership that we have. And I think Eliza is here somewhere. And Eliza, it's a great partnership with you also, right, in all of this. But this is about a partnership for all of us and what we're able to do. We're curious in the next few minutes, how does this resonate? Where do we go with it?
I think a lot of those principles, even though maybe for early childhood, certainly apply for adults. But I'm so pleased to see this being introduced to children at such a young age. It's much easier to get out in front of this kind of stuff. I think when I was growing up, this stuff, you just didn't talk about it until a certain time. So it's great that you're doing it, implanting these thoughts and perspectives, kids at that very young age. That's going to pay great dividends in the years to come.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Well, I'll express gratitude that we spent the 50 minutes together with hopes that what we talked about, what we learned, what we uncovered today, even if it has not challenged you because you walked in at the same place that you are now, that it reinforces you. Often people say to me, oh, come on, Ron, you're preaching to the choir on all that liberal progressive stuff that you're doing. And the response is, no, I'm not preaching to the choir. The response is, I'm rehearsing with the choir, because we need to rehearse our work, our music, our compositions, so that when we're not together, all 37 of us, that we'll be able to sing independently and share that song with other people. So please, please take some nuggets of what we have, what we've shared today, right? And share it with other people, because we know this is what our mandate is for humanity and as a Jewish community. And one plug, if you'd like to get involved a little bit, just go to Center for Loving Kindness at the JCC website. Just type in Center for Loving Kindness and it'll pop up on your Google. And we'd be happy to keep you informed about the work that we're doing and the ways that we get together. Any other last comments? Well, Chag Sameach, everyone. Pray for peace in Jerusalem at large, for peace throughout the world, for peace in our own communities.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, Ron.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was beautiful.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Hi, Ron.
Hi, Debbie. How you doing?
I'm okay. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Challenging times for Israel connections.
Yep.
Yeah.
Very hard.
What are you hearing from the region?
Things are not good there. Last night in Eshkar,
No, it's live.
people were burning tires and throwing rocks toxic cars right outside of the gate to the yeshuv.
Mm.
And someone, Jewish man from Miskov, drove through Tamra by accident, and he was attacked, pulled from his car and attacked.
Wow.
So it's not good.
No, it's not good. It's not good. All right. Well, as you're communicating with folks there, of course, let them all know that we're thinking.
I absolutely will.
Yeah. All right. And I think I step off, and Barbara's going to sign on to the same webpage. I think.
Yeah.
Zoom page.
Correct.
Right.
So much, Ron and Katie.
Thank you, Joyce. Katie, I'm going to give you a call in a minute. Okay.
Sounds good.
Great. Bye, everyone.
Debbie, I think I've passed you the proverbial torch.
Okay, great. So I'm a host now. Let's
Yep.
see. I have all the
Oh, and I didn't stop the recording, so you might want to stop it.
Okay.
And then you restart it again after all.